In our last chapter, or segment, we were talking about the 7 last plagues. We talked about some writers who had written about this time period earlier and predicted. I didn't want to read all of the stuff because reading too much is like the negation of cinema. But sometimes, as I said before, there are so many notes and so many things going on there. This would might be one of the more controversial parts potentially because, quite frankly, some of the stuff is future. What we do believe is that the first 4 of these bowls probably took place in the period from about 1790 to 1815. I might read a part here there. Let's see if I can find the opinion. There's the time. The historical interpreters in general attribute the sounding of the 7th trumpet to the period of the French Revolution, which we've talked about many times, in 1793, with the first 4 bowls of wrath poured out by 1815. Now, some people object because that's kind of a short time period, but a lot of stuff happened in this time period. And as we might expect, since time is getting shorter, time is going to be running out for some of these things. But even as we notice all the, from the seals, the 7 seals, the first 4 of them take place in the first couple hundred years, about 300 years. Well, actually 200, from 96 to about AD 313. And yet then the next 3, okay, we have the Christianization, we have some things, and we have the breakup of the Roman Empire. But then the 7th seal opens the 7 trumpets. Now, as I've talked about before, those go all the way, since they open the 7 trumpets, that goes to a much greater period of time. At least the 1260 years we've talked about. But we notice the 7 trumpets talk about things, the first 4 of those talk about the actual fall of Rome in a period of about 100 years, less than 100 years. So there's already precedent here. The trumpets themselves take place in a fairly truncated period of time. All right, we talked about all the everything from Alaric and the Visigoths, the Vandals, the Hun. We talked about Attila the Hun and those things. That happened in how the land, sea, and water in Rome was driven out and basically done away with. And then we have the periods of the 5th trumpet, which brings us up 150 more years. And then we have the period of the 6th trumpet, which brings us really a long period of time from about the 5th trumpet brings us, the actual power is about 150 years, but they were around about 400 years. And then we have from about the 11th century, 1057 to really to 1917, we have the 6th trumpet time period, and yet then there are things inside of that we needed to deal with, specifically the 1260 years. My point is that the first 4 seals, the first 4 trumpets were fairly truncated. And in this case, I believe the same thing has happened, and I think it might be warranted to look at this and see if we think this might be possible. So, if the first 4 bowls or plagues poured out by 1815, this book has we have the unusual opportunity of commenting on events that are still so current as to be almost to be news. In other words, historical interpreters were talking about this during the times of their own life. They were like predicting it. There were some things people were predicting. As I mentioned, the one guy who predicted the fall of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, that it was going to come against the papal authority, but it wasn't going to conquer it. It would slowly waste away many hundreds of years before it happened. In fact, in the height of its Turkish power, and say in like manner, a little bit more, you have people happening right in the time period. It says, let's review some of what they say. One of them is I guess William Jenks, who was the editor of the Comprehensive Commentary of the Holy Bible, and says, what do they think of their place in the historical scheme of the symbols of Revelation? Actually, they have differing views of whether the 7th trumpet has or has not yet been sounded, or whether the bowls have or have not yet begun to be poured out. But they have little doubt that at the time they wrote, they were either in the period of the events, or the events were just then imminent. So Scott says, it may be observed by some readers that I have not at all noticed the interpretation of those who consider several of the vials as long since poured out. This has resulted from a full conviction that these interpretations are absolutely inconsistent with the chronology of prophecy and the whole clue which must direct us in expounding it, and they are altogether unsatisfactory, even as insulated accommodations. So, the opinion of those who explain the former of the vials, the first four, are recent events which have occurred within these last 20 years. Now, here's where we get to it: 1793 to 1813, or 1815, if you will. Whether well-grounded or not may be allowed to be consistent with the chronology of the book, and with these vials containing a prediction of the last plagues. The grand question to decide in this respect relates to the sounding of the seventh trumpet. If that event be past, which we believe it's not past, we're in it. We're in the sounding of the seventh trumpet because the seven vials are opened by the seventh trumpet. That's the mistake. Some of these earlier commentators, they thought the seventh trumpet sounded, then the seven vials are something totally independent. This is not the case. It's very apparent that just as the seventh seal opened up the seven trumpets, the seventh trumpet opens up the seven last plagues. And so the seventh trumpet has not yet passed. They're actually in it in the time of the first four vials, and when they're writing at this at the time of the French Revolution. So, for it seems clear that as the seventh seal includes all the seven trumpets, so the seventh trumpet includes all the seven vials. So he gets it right. This guy gets it right. Nor do I think it possible for human sagacity to determine till, in other words, sage wisdom, okay, till some considerable time has elapsed at what precise period events of such immense magnitude as those have here predicted begin to be accomplished. Although Scott is not sure whether or not the seventh trumpet has sounded in the era of the French Revolution, he knows of those who do think so. His feelings are based on the end of the 1260 years, of which I am basing it on, which is understood to encompass the time when the papacy will reign as the beast, or combine the secular power with the temporal. This is what I think. Okay? Well, actually, it is both in some respects. At the time Scott wrote, the temporal power was still seemingly secure. The loss was to come by degrees, and Scott did not think it had started in 1793. He wrote this in 1793. Okay? He quotes others. Some indeed of late have fixed the beginning of this period, the 1260 years, to AD 533. Well, we've already gone over that many, many times. All right? Scott's caution is well taken. However, because of events that seem important to us at the time, they often have less importance as time goes on. He's a little cautious here, all right? And that's the way it should be. It is quite right that the 1260 years should be begun at that date, as shown before. The 1260 years terminate the second woe, and behold, the third comes quickly. Scott's caution, as he said, is well taken, because things that are very important then, I still remember the time back when I was a kid, how important what was the one thing that there was a big pollution thing that happened back in the 70s, and everyone was all panicked. We're going to have 3 eyes by the year the 1990. What was it? I can't even remember what it was now, but it was something that infected the feed and stuff. Now kids had never even heard about it, And there are other big events. There are world events that seemingly are world events, but they don't really have, within 20, 30 years seem to fade as far as importance. But the ones that Scott talked about, he got it right, I think. And so Scott's caution, he says it was well taken because, it is easy for us to see events from 1917 to the present as part of a larger period of Soviet expansion and decline, or a struggle between totalitarianism and representative government, rather than dividing into First and Second World Wars as two different epochs. They're the same epoch. They are. How do we pick the events? And we know that from studying the Revelation chapter 13 and 17 about the Roman Empire. How do we pick the events that have a universal and permanent and ongoing influence of world events? One should ask, is it part of the big picture? Scott's objection to the Napoleonic period, including all 4 of the bulls, is that since the commencement of the French Revolution seems too short to encompass events of such far-reaching magnitude. In other words, it's a very short period of time. We've already addressed that. All right? But did the atheism... but we have to look at the vials. Do they fit the symbols? The first 4. Did the atheism of the French Revolution and resulting middle-class democratic ideals and nationalistic constitutional government rising therefrom inhibit forever the naked autocracy of the papacy? Yes. Did the loss of the navies of the period by the papal nations, that's where one of the symbols, the seas, okay, forever in loss of the navies in the period by the papal nations diminish the power of the Pope? Yes. Did the loss of was Napoleon's invasion of Tyrol, battles on the rivers, stripping the Vatican to its naked walls, garrisoning troops in the Vatican, which resulted in imprisoning the Pope in Avignon, a permanent blow to his power. Yes. Okay? Were the European wars which dismantled the Holy Roman Empire forever a blow which diminished the power of the beast? Yeah, well, the beast as it was embodied in Rome, yes, or the papal power. Were all four events taken together permanent injury to papal power, which would leave the world looking for the next stage, a blow that would fall on the temporal seat of the papacy, Rome itself or the papal states, which all interpreters of the period judged to be future. Scott thought that they might be, but he was going to have to wait and see. Now later on, he gets a little more brave as he lives later on. He says, now, if the conditions in the above, in hindsight, we can answer all of the above yes, as I just did, with no hesitation, but Scott was writing during the time period of it. If the conditions of the above paragraph be true from hindsight, then they answer the parallels of the bowls even though the time is short. Scott says as much when looking at the fourth bowl. Whether burning seasons producing drought or famine or some other judgment figuratively described by the scorching heat of the sun be intended, the event must show. These verses are interpreted by Mr. Faber to mean, good, I got the page right here. Love this, okay? The present tyranny of the ruler of France over that nation and other kingdoms of the beast on the continent. Not wishing to oppose this interpretation and much less to subscribe to it, I only again observe that our posterity at the end of the century will be more competent judges of the subject than we can be. But we've seen the first four vials were those things that happened. The papal power stripped from the seas. The empire, the things that happened on there really happened the way it went into it. From 1815 to 1848, Scott would have been able to see that the authoritarianism and the feudalistic rule of kings pass in Europe and the consequent rise of constitutional government. By 1848, all the states of Europe had adopted nationalistic constitutional governments, and representative parliaments were set up that were brought on by the French Revolution and the acts of Napoleon. These included all the states of the former Holy Roman Empire, except Italy, which would also yield to the rising tide of democracy in a few more years. The seventh trumpet did sound in 1793. Harvest and vintage. All right? So what do we go on here? What I'm trying to get to is that Napoleon was I believe the symbols we're reading. Let's go back and go over this just a little bit here, so we might be able to refresh our memories. The first four we hear is let's see. Okay, the first one went and poured out his bowl on the earth, which is really a symbol of the false church there. And a foul and loathsome sore came upon men who had the mark of the beast, and those who worshipped his image. They looked like they were full of the plague and didn't want nothing to do with them. The second angel poured out his bowl on the sea, the papal powers. I could go into the Napoleonic things, which are very amazing, by the way. The naval losses of the nations allied with the papacy from 1798 to 1806. It's unbelievable. The Battle of the Nile, 1798. Napoleon's French fleet of 17 vessels that carried his army to Egypt was destroyed by Nelson. You have to remember, Napoleon was under the papal thing here. Even though he took the crown for himself, France was still a Catholic nation. September 1798. French fleet of 9 vessels fell into the British hands off the coast of Ireland. 1799, the infant American fleet by the close of 1800 had captured or sunk 90 French vessels carrying more than 700 guns, and a great number of American vessels were retaken. On the other hand, British Navy had nearly doubled in strength with 800 vessels. And of course, British, they were the Protestant nation. Interesting, isn't it? But this isn't the only one. Spain lost their power. France, all the Catholic nations lost their naval power during this period of time. They also lost the power in the rivers as well. Okay? Trafalgar, very famous battle here. Early in the morning of October 21st, 1805, 33 Spanish and French ships of the line, 5 frigates and 2 brigs, sailed for the Straits. Nelson on the Victory, commanding 12 ships, and Collingwood on the Royal Sovereign, commanding 15 ships opposed. Only 5 French ships got away, 4 of which were soon discovered and destroyed. Napoleon issued his report that his ships had been lost in a storm. In fact, the Battle of Trafalgar at one stroke destroyed the sea power of France and Spain, from which they have never recovered to this day. There's just one thing after another. Remember how the Rome was driven from the sea by the rivers by Attila and by the trying to think which one it was earlier had driven that Rome had been driven from the sea about 30 years earlier than that. There's many things like this that are correlating on that. So what Moeller is trying to do is show that many of the prophetic writers, because he's going to make a proposition here. We have some of these bowls that we are right in the process of being fulfilled right now. The first four really have to do with the destruction by Napoleon and also the countries that were under Catholic sway. Their political power was destroyed. All right. And it continued on out. There was a last gasp, went up until 1870, but 1848 is significant dates. I don't want to just bog you down with just a bunch of dates. But the fifth one, the fourth angel poured out his bowl on the sun, and power was given to him to scorch men with fire. Men were scorched with great heat, and they blasphemed the name of God, who has power over these plagues, and they did not repent and give him glory. Some people think that may be Napoleon himself, that he's as a son there. You can take that as you will. Fifth angel poured out his bowl on the throne of the beast, and his kingdom became full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues because of the pain. And he blasphemed the God of the heaven because of their pains and their sores, and not repent of their deeds. And then the sixth angel poured out his bowl. And by the way, this is, you have to say, the last gasp of papal thing in 1870 says, he declared himself infallible. That's where the rule of, what they call that, there's the Catholic word of it, but it's the doctrine of infallibility that they call it ex cathedra. And they said that, that came up. That was never a doctrine. Although they may have believed it, they never actually spoke it, that this was the way it was. 1870, papal infallibility, but he was going nowhere. All right? So very shortly after that, though, it says the sixth angel poured out his bowl on the great river Euphrates, and its water was dried up so that the way of the kings from the east might be prepared. And I saw three unclean spirits. Now, this potentially, remember in the seven trumpets, the sixth trumpet, that the river Euphrates, with the roaring river, and the Ottoman Empire is out and comes in force. 200 million horsemen is talking about in power. It conquers Constantinople, becomes Istanbul. Its terror is known even in the times of the 1600s, all the way through the 1700s. But by the late 1700s, early 1800s, it begins to start falling apart. And what it says here is that it's going to fall upon the river Euphrates, and it says it's going to be dried up. It pours out his bowl on the great river Euphrates. So instead of power, remember that the Euphrates was a symbol of Turkish power. It's telling you, I believe right now, the sixth bowl is telling you Turkish power is also going to dry up. Papal power is going to be done away with, but so is Turkish power. We have also, and that's basically the Islamic power. We also have the secular power. That's going to rise and continue to rise up, okay, according to these plagues here. And that's what we have. We start saying we have the spirits. I saw three unclean spirits like frogs coming out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, okay? Now, these, I believe, are still talking about the papal system. Moeller believes the false prophet, and other people, I think, and there's some credibility to this, might in fact be, the rise of Islam itself, because that is one of the names of Muhammad. He calls himself the prophet, but it's obvious he's false. He's caused a world to come into violence and cataclysm and death and destruction. It's been that way since the very beginning. I know full well that there are peaceful people who practice they practice what they call Islam, but when you read his book, all of his violent passages have to do in his later writings, which take precedence, and that would be one of those doctrines of demons that come out. We also have, but I have always talked about the false prophet as being really the man of sin, the Pope. I am not. We can have some dispute on this, okay? When everybody does things about Revelation, they try to be dogmatic. I think in hindsight, we can look at a lot of the fulfillments of the symbols and be fairly certain. But we're coming into realms where we're into our own time, and predictions need to be made. This man Moeller talked about the rise of resurgent Islam in our day. He did this in the 60s. I thought that's quite amazing. That gives it credence in my book, that maybe that is what it's talking about, since papal authority really was going to be done away with by this time, as far as real power. But the dragon is now coming out of the sea itself. It may have begun in 1793, but by this time it's begun. It's really coming out. I have played with the idea that the devil himself may have only arisen out of the bottomless pit since the fall of Rome, which was Adolf Hitler. All right, let's go into that and recap a little bit here. We have many, many entities we're talking about, and they've all affected the church. Okay, we need to deal with the church, and we've dealt with it in quite lengthy detail. But we have the secular world system, the corrupted church, and Islam are three branches that have really hammered the church over the millennia of time. The Islamic one is a later one, and in fact, in point of fact, it was designed to take the heat off the true church for a while the papal system became distracted, I believe. All right? But now those things are not really the issue. Islam is rising up in its own. Although the Turkish, the Euphrates thing has dried up, we still have one last seventh plague here, and this is Armageddon. We are now in the time of Armageddon. We had the Holy Roman Empire also postdated the fall of Papal Rome. The papal power, temporal 1260, is over, but the Holy Roman Empire also comes up, and it goes beyond the Islamic time period. This is what's important for you to understand. The Ottoman Empire fell apart in 1917. It dried up, and in a period of about 100 years, maybe 150, no more than about 100 years, from about 1817 to about 1917, the Islamic Ottoman Empire fell apart in stages. And it just slowly, the Euphrates River, which I believe is talking about this, dried up, ceased, and blew away. But the false system, or the false teaching, is still around, just as the man of sin is still around. Just as the one world system, the beast, is now coming out and rising up. Now, we talked about in Revelation 17 how the beast how 10 horns that came out of the beast hated the whore, which is another term for the beast, the dragon, lamb beast, the man of sin. All of these are the same thing. That it hates the whore. It's talking about its religious aspect here. Strips it, burns it with fire. We've already talked about that. But this is all in the period of Armageddon. Okay, this began at the Protestant Reformation and continues in the French Revolution. Notice it's the horns that are doing this. The horns gave the Protestant Reformation its power. But that's why many churches in the Protestant Reformation have become daughters of the whore, because they were subsidized by secular powers, and they've gone back to their mother in a lot of respects, okay? And especially in their idolatry and things of that nature. But the secular powers are really what's going on in ascendancy right now. It's a world that's going to strip off the religious power of the beast. It doesn't want that anymore. Okay? Islam is fighting for dear life right now. It's going to be destroyed, I believe. It will be destroyed. Not because the United States is so great, but because it will implode on its own efforts, and because the Bible itself seems to indicate it's not going to be the thing that's going to be the beast. The beast itself is a secular world system that began at the Tower of Babel. Babel had the Whore of Babylon rode on all the heads of the beast, because by then the false religious system had gone up. It kept people enthralled to it. But in reality, the whole purpose of it was for Satan to throw off the shackles of God. He wanted to throw off the oppressive nature and the rules and the rule of God's kingdom. He wanted to throw that off, even though as believers we know that his rule is he rules the nations with a rod of iron. But yet, nevertheless, he says, take on my yoke. My burden is easy. My yoke is light. He is the good shepherd. He is the one that is gentle and meek. We know that those who come to him, broken and contrite, he will raise up and make them be seated and ruling and reigning in the heavenly places. Okay? So we are in this battle of Armageddon, and the seventh angel sounds at that point in time. This, folks, is where I believe we are. We are in the valley of God. We are not quite there. I don't believe the seventh angel has sounded yet, because the papacy, the man of sin, has not been thrown into the lake of fire. That system is not done away with, and it seems to me that has to be the temporal power is done away with, but the man of sin himself is still around. He seems to be going to the very end. Islam will go to the very end, and the secular world kingdoms will go to the very end. And that's what we come. We've already done with chapter 17. We instructed all of that business, and we're going to go into chapter 18 and 19. Very close. One more point in chapter 17. In the Battle of Armageddon, it tells you that every island